All right, we are very excited to be joined by David Lowery. Thank you for joining us. And not only that, I'm excited because we've already seen this movie. We already talked about it, and we already quite love The Green Knight. We've discussed it on the pod before, so I'm not going to get into what it is. We've done our review, we've done our discussion, but now let's get into kind of maybe peek behind the curtain a little bit. But how are you doing? How's it going now post Green Knight release? You got to be pretty pleased.
I am. I oddly was disconnected from the release because I was shooting another movie. So we wrapped that movie on Friday. And now I'm back home for the first time in like a year. And I'm just sort of like becoming aware that The Green Knight actually is. I went to the movies last night to see The Suicide Squad. And I was like, oh, The Green Knight's playing here. This is so strange. Like, because I was in production, I just sort of disconnected from the fact that it was actually physically available for people to see. And last night, just walking past like a theater where it was playing, I was like, I could step into this theater right now and go see it. And that would be my movie playing there. How bizarre.
Quick question on that. What is the coolest moment besides seeing your poster in the actual movie theater? Is it cooler seeing a standee? Because I think seeing a standee of your movie has to be the coolest. Just like a massive Dev Patel with a big axe in the middle of the theater. That has to be awesome, right?
That was the coolest until I saw photos of like giant building sized banners hanging off of like buildings, which I don't know if they're in the US, but I saw lots of those in Canada. And that was, the scale of that was daunting and awesome.
Damn, that's awesome.
I want to ask about what you just said production wise, because The Green Knight, I forget exactly what the original release schedule was, because now it all just blends together for all of these movies that got delayed. But did that have to just end up being a moment for you where you have to move on to another production, another movie, and you kind of have to just be like, all right, Green Knight, see you later. Like it's going to come out when it comes out. Is that what had to happen? You kind of just let it go?
That does happen, but it was a really weird version of it because I was prepping a movie while finishing this one. And this movie was originally supposed to open in May of 2020. And in that original release date, I would have been in the second week of principal photography on the new film. And then all of that got shut down. The release got delayed and the other movie got put on ice because of the pandemic. And so now here we are, and it's opening at the tail end of that same movie being shot. And because of that, I was able to not only revisit the movie in terms of how the editing of it, but I was also able to say goodbye to it in a way, because we ultimately finished it in October. And so I was able to just kind of cast away. I knew it wouldn't open for a long time. At that point, we didn't even know when it would open, but I was able to sort of make my peace with it and send it on its way, which is really what I always try to do with my movies. I always try to have that separation between finishing it and letting it out into the world. Oh, here's one of my cats.
There's the cat. We were talking about that before.
For those listeners, love that. Even hit the mute button for a second.
Yeah. And so, yeah, you really just have to know in your heart that it's not yours anymore. You just let it out into the world. The world will do with it what it does. And it's important for me to disconnect from that. Usually I'm not as disconnected as I was, but because I was in production, I was able to just really tune out the fact that it was out there.
Now, in terms of the movie, you've done screenplays based on modern books, articles, bunch of stuff, but this obviously a much different story, a much different type of thing it's based on. Was that challenge greater? And I asked that with an added question, because people listen to this podcast know this era and these types of stories are not usually my cup of tea, but I connected a lot more with this than I have with other Arthurian type stories, because there seemed to be a different way you adapted it. You gave it, for sure. You can change. Maybe I'm putting words in your mouth. Your own spin, your own twist, in a sense.
I did put my own twist on it, definitely, and I made it very personal, both intentionally and unintentionally. There are aspects of it that are so personal to me that I'm shocked I didn't see them while I was making it. But that's always the way with personal stuff; it always bubbles to the surface. In terms of how I, put my spin on it, it really was more that I just was trying to stay true to the source material. I really fell in love with the poem while I was adapting it. I liked it prior to adapting it. I was a fan of that material, but I thought maybe that it would just be the template for something, or I could use it as a jumping off point. And as I started to write the screenplay, I just realized I just want to stay true to this and how this makes me feel, and try to put as much of that text, that 14th century text, on screen as possible. There are definitely changes I had to make to it and changes I decided to make to it, but that, I think, more than anything, is probably what gives it its uniquity.
Was there something in this movie, whether, I mean, I don't know, how many times have you watched it back in full since it was completed?
Since it was completed, 0. I have not seen it in October, but I've seen it in full. I feel like usually I wind up watching it from start to finish. Any movie I make, roughly 40 times, which is pretty low. I try to keep it low because I don't want to get tired of it. But my wife just finished a movie and she watched it definitely over 100 times from start to finish. So I'm realizing I don't see it that many times.
Was there one scene for you? Because this was also, I think, visually stunning, is 2 words that have been thrown at this movie a bunch that we've said as well. Is there one thing though that for you maybe exceeded expectations? Like, that looks fucking awesome. That looks as cooler than I imagined that could have looked.
Well, there's the Green Knight, who just looked incredible. Like when he first walked on for his camera test a few days before he shot his first scene, I was just like, well, that worked.
It's got to be relief.
Yeah. And there was a chance that it wouldn't. We had very little prep time for a movie of this scale. Like, we had about 8 weeks of prep, which is far less than we could have used. I mean, we were just racing on everything. And, the King Arthur's Court, the Camelot, the Round Table, that set was not done when we started shooting on it. We were really, behind the curve, but everything culminated in like exactly what we wanted it to be. And it all wound up being really awesome. The sequence with Saint Winifred is one of my favorites. I think that sequence, I just remember being on set, and it's one of those rare things where you're just like, the weather worked perfectly and the actors we already knew were amazing, but just everything clicked. We shot that over one night, and everything was just like one of those rare magical moments where everything just clicked. We had other days where the rest of the shoot, the weather did not cooperate at all, but that night was perfect. And it resulted in a sequence that I just absolutely love.
It's one of the few times I think shooting in the UK where you need it to be actually damp and muggy and gross, and actually worked in that scene.
It was so frustrating because we went to Ireland and the UK because we wanted, inclement weather, and we got the most beautiful weather.
Go figure.
We had to paint out a rainbow because there were just so many rainbows in the scenes, and we're like, how is this happening? But that sequence was perfect, and then the entire ending of the movie, from the Green Chapel to the end, worked so well and so far beyond my expectations. I've talked a lot about how I did a lot of recutting of the film and revising the edit, but that sequence, from the time that he gets to the Green Chapel to the time he talks to the fox to the end of the movie, has not changed more than like a few frames since the very first assembly. And that was because it was just like, this works. This is so much better than I intended. Let's not mess it up.
Speaking of the fox and the Green Knight himself, how did you work out the balance between visual versus practical effects? Because we talk about it all the time. That's something that we feel can very much, make or break a movie. But luckily you had Weta, who's like an amazing visual studio. But like, what was your I would say, target balance between those two types of effects?
There's not really a ratio, but if you have something like a CG fox in a shot, it's in your best interest to make sure that everything else is completely real. So every environment is real. Every, those caves are real. The rain is real. All of that is real, so that the one thing that's not can absorb the reality that it's being placed within. So I think that's my rule. And that was something I learned on Pete's Dragon too, was like, have everything real except for the one big thing that needs to be a visual effect. When it came to like, set extensions or, I think there's nothing in the movie that was just shot on blue screen. Everything is like real, and then we would just enhance it. And that's always what I try to do. I always want to go to real places. I want to be in real environments. I want to, feel that weather. And then if we need to take advantage of everything that visual effects can offer, then we'll use that to enhance it. So you have like that sequence where Dev and Barry Keoghan are on a battlefield, which was the scene where we had to paint the rainbow out of. But it's just a one long take, and they're crossing a battlefield. And at a certain point, we ran out of bodies. It wound up being a longer walk and talk than we intended. And so we can use visual effects to sort of like replicate some of the, we had a lot of dead bodies at the beginning of the field, and we can use visual effects to sort of like take some of those and replicate them at the end, paint out some of the tire treads that popped up every now and then, and add a little bit of extra smoke and debris here and there. But it's all based in reality, as opposed to shooting something on blue screen where you have to invent everything. So every castle is real, but we just made them bigger. Every visual effect had its root in reality.
Yeah, I heard you got the real giants on set too for that one scene too. That was pretty cool. Cool if you guys get the authentic ones in there.
Real giants, yep.
There's one thing I really liked about you did in this movie was the fact that you trusted the viewer to the point where you don't need to say some things out loud. Like you don't need to say, "Hey, that's Merlin. Hey, that's Excalibur." And I love that about it. But were you nervous at all about how regular viewers might digest that, not having stuff like spelled out for them, so to speak?
No, not at all. In fact, in the script, we never mention those things either. You never mention King Arthur. It's just the king, the queen, the wizard. And in fact, I don't even think Merlin was in the script. He may have shown up at some point, but the actor that played him just came in from background casting. His name was Emmett, and we were just like, he looks incredible. He needs to be a wizard in this movie. And we just kept adding him to more scenes. But it wasn't, I knew you're going to see a round table. So then you can put the pieces together from there. If you see a round table with a bunch of knights around it, chances are it's a King Arthur movie. But I didn't want this to be beholden to one's expectations as to what a King Arthur movie needs to be. I think it has sort of like risen to the surface in terms of the discourse around the film more than I anticipated, which is a good thing. And I think that people will probably go back and read the poem, which is a great thing. But in terms of how we approached the movie, we wanted it to exist slightly to the left of being a literal King Arthur movie. We didn't want it to be part of that genre, so to speak. We didn't want people to think like, oh, you need to have a double feature of this and Excalibur. Although if you do, that's great. But it's definitely, I love the fact that it's become common knowledge that sword is Excalibur. And when you talk about that scene, everyone talks about when Dev gets to hold Excalibur. And I love that because we knew that on set, but we didn't know if it would ever like percolate up into the conversations about the movie.
I absolutely love that trust. Something you mentioned too was how you just wanted to feel being in those environments so much more. Like you were saying before, you filmed all these castles out in Ireland. How important was location scouting for you? Because I think, you get the wrong castle and this is a totally different vibe, or maybe it doesn't work. You never know. But those castle scenes that you had were so just gorgeous. And they really, I think, helped engross us again as viewers into this different era and this whole different mythological world.
Location scouting is like the most important part. Well, not the most important part, but the first important part of any movie. And I would love to like make a documentary about location scouts because they're always there at the beginning. Like you're in a van for weeks on end with your location scout and just driving around, and they in some ways know the movie better than anybody because you're sitting there trying to put it together with them. And so we spent a couple weeks in Ireland just driving around looking at castles, but also looking at landscapes. And the realities of production ultimately impose certain restrictions. Like you might find something on the west side of Ireland that you love, but you can't afford to take the entire company there just for one shot. So ultimately everything we kind of like loved was narrowed down to within, an hour of Dublin in the Wicklow Mountains, which ironically or not was where John Boorman did shoot most of Excalibur. We were in his backyard literally while shooting this movie. And then we found a couple of things like Cahir Castle, which has been in Excalibur, and Barry Lyndon. And I think you can even see it in the trailer for the new Ridley Scott movie, The Last Duel. And that was, 90 minutes away. So we're like, okay, how much can we shoot there? And we drive, we spend the time driving there, putting everybody up, and then shoot as much as you can there to justify that expense of being there. It was hard though. It was hard to find the right castles because castles in general are, in ruin and they're not well kept, especially the ones from the 14th century or earlier, and Cahir Castle being one of the exceptions. And so we had to sort of decide early on that we're going to bend the rules and not feature castles that were tied to one particular time period. So when he gets to the Lord and Lady's Castle, that building was built centuries after the other castles you see in the movie. but we tried to create a world in which that castle could coexist with these more ancient ones. And that just took a little bit of like imagination on our parts to figure out how to make that work. Ultimately, that castle is a combination of two different castles and visual effects. But it definitely, you're entering a different realm at that point. So it felt okay to just jump forward a couple centuries. But it's equivocal to like making a movie in the 1800s and all of a sudden having a modern house in it. That's that's the jump you're making. Like, how do we make this believable? How do we make this actually functional within the storytelling?
But again, I think that could be, I think for me, why I enjoyed it as someone who may not typically connect. Like there just was something you could tell, like it was a different, and modern's not the right word, but like, you know what I mean? Like it just felt blended in a different way than a lot of these stories are told, and not in a direct way as well, which leads me to my next question is that this type of storytelling, and even like you said, leaving things out and like, letting people like, learn it, like seeing the round table. Are there other mythological stories or poems or tales that you want to tackle? Maybe not Arthurian, Greek, Norse, anything like that. Have you now, is like that bug there? Like, oh, there's another thing in my mind I want to take on.
Yeah, I grew up loving all of this stuff like that. Like the first script I ever wrote was about Sir Percival and his quest for the Holy Grail. And around that same time, I was obsessed with Greek mythology. And I would love to make a Perseus and Medusa movie that is, I love Clash of the Titans. Clash of the Titans is fantastic, but I would love to put my own spin on that. And that's something I've been thinking about lately.
Another movie of yours, also A24 branch, which I want to talk to you about, A Ghost Story from a couple of years back. You now made two movies that are very, they bleed A24. It feels like it's become like this thing now. Like he's even wearing Ken's even wearing the hat. You just
right here. Last time we're at the studio.
You can just tell when it's a movie that is released under that umbrella. Is there something different though as a filmmaker when you're releasing with that? Like the movies just feel distinct, right? In a sense where it's only been the last couple of years or so where it's become more and more mainstream. Like, is there just something with A24 movies that have that either look or feel or just vibe? You're like, well, that's an A24 movie. You can just tell.
I think the vibe comes down to a shared sense of taste between everyone at the company and the filmmakers, because they release movies that I like. And because I like them all, I can group them under like the A24 banner because A24 has released them. But if they were released by someone else, I would have still, if Fox Searchlight had released The Lighthouse, I would have still loved it. But so would all the folks at A24, and they probably would have been like, oh, I wish we had distributed that. Thankfully, they are distributing these movies. And because their taste is so in sync with my own, I think it's made for a natural fit. A Ghost Story and The Green Knight could probably have been released by someone else, but would they have been released as well? I don't think so, because when you have a distributor like A24 who loves these types of movies and really cares about the way in which they're put out into the world, they pop in a different way. And that's become synchronous with their brand. It's weird. I work with A24 and I work with Disney. These two studios who have a very distinct brand. And when you go see a Disney movie, you know what you're going to get. You're going to get a Disney movie. And now somehow, miraculously, when you go through see an A24 movie, even though every one of those movies is completely different, you kind of know what you're in for. And I kind of love that.
I like it, going off that, because you just said it, like whether it's Pete's Dragon, you're doing Peter Pan and Wendy for Disney. Like there's, especially people like us who like Ken Jackson, like my desk, he's wearing the A24 hat, but our conjoined desk has so many fucking Avengers Funko Pops on it. We just were in that realm. Like I love both, but it is the idea that like a Green Knight, or you mentioned it, like The Lighthouse, which is one of the most insane movies that, anyone's seen in the last couple of years. Is it more though, what you just said, like the way they're distributed than them not being made? Because I've said that, and maybe I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm wrong. I do think a lot of movies are made. Like there's still 200 to 300 movies made a year in that, like that zone that are released in the United States. And these movies are there. They're just, I keep saying, I think it's an attention thing more than anything. There's not getting the appropriate attention upon release. Yeah. Is it truly more distribution than just not being made?
Totally. Yeah. Because those, like you said, those movies are being made and you see them elsewhere. Like you see them pop up on Shudder. You see them pop up on iTunes. And And every now and then you see one, and I'll see one where I was like, that could have been an A24 movie. I don't know why it's not, but it's not, but I'm glad I saw it. And the movies do get made, but somehow A24 has figured out a way to get them into the world in a way that gets attention. And I've been the recipient of that twice. And I think there's a sense of both respect for the films themselves, but a sense of irreverence to it that makes it fun. The release of the movies are always fun. And obviously a ghost story is not like a fun rip-roaring movie. It's not even a fun movie. Green Knight, some people call it fun, but it's not your typical fun movie. But the release feels fun. The release feels like an event in the same way that the Avengers Endgame felt like an event. It's a different type of event, but they've eventized it in a really unique and I think refreshing way, because I love seeing films like this treated as if they were events. It's so easy to just like say, this is art house material. It's going to get a very distinguished art house release for a very discerning clientele, and then it will be available on Blu-ray in 3 months. Here they're treating these movies, whether it's The Green Knight or Zola or the films that are coming out this fall, they're treating them as if they were Avengers films and getting people excited about them. They're
getting standees, like we were saying before. You got big ass standees in the middle of the theater.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe someday an A24 movie will make 300 million, but generally they don't need to. They don't need to make that much money to be an equivocal success because the budgets are lower. And so that's really exciting. I love that they figure out with each film a unique way to make that film's existence in the world an event unto itself.
It is funny you say that, because that is the comment that kind of bothers me as someone who's a massive comic book movie fan, but also like we live for these types of, like The Green Knight, A Ghost Story. It's like all comic book movies. It's like, it really isn't. It's like there's a lot, in the grand scheme. There's like 8 or 9 a year, but that's 8 or 9 out of 250 movies released a year. So it's like, they're there. We just
get it on Prime and click one page in, and you'll see there's a lot of movies out there that are not superhero movies.
Exactly. But about Ghost Story, about the release of A Ghost Story, did you have had to be someone who had no idea what they were going into, thinking they're about to go into a horror movie when they saw that movie? And then you see the reaction of it's haunting. It's just very much not a horror movie. Was there anyone just...
I never witnessed that myself, but I did. People would send me photos of signs at movie theaters, like that they would type up and hang on the box office window saying, "A Ghost Story is not a horror movie."
That's amazing.
And you will not get your money back. Just be aware of what this is before you go into it. And there were a lot of different variations of that.
People are walking out crying, like, what the fuck?
Also, people have sent me photos of it, on Halloween, Walmart has their horror movie standee of all the DVDs, and A Ghost Story is there, and I'm like, oh man, someone's buying this for their Halloween movie party.
Oh my god,
a cool ghost movie. And I always hope, I figure 9 out of 10 people are going to be really disappointed and not make it past minute 20, and then there's going to be the one person who's mind is blown, and that's the most exciting thing.
They were at their Halloween party dressed as the Tiger King in tears. They're like, what happened?
Yes, that's exactly who I want to see this movie. Those people.
Torn apart by family drama. Something really fascinating about that movie is the fact that they had to act behind essentially sheets, and you lose so much. I feel like physical and facial acting adds so much, especially in a drama that's so important. So how did you, as a director, make up for losing that element while you're making that?
It really became about the context, the mise en scène, to use the art house term for it. But we realized that what you lack in facial expression, you make up for in the way in which you frame the ghost in his environment. And it really was an incredible lesson in how communicative an image can be. You're so used to just relying on faces. And I am a sucker for a close-up. I will put that camera an inch from an actor's face because I just love watching them emote. And when you remove that from the table, when you take that off the table, you realize that there's still a lot that cinema has to offer in terms of finding ways to convey that emotion. And so putting a character in a frame and framing them in a very specific way, that's an age-old technique for creating a vibe, a mood. But when you only have that, you realize exactly how important it is.
It's incredible. We're both huge fans of it. We want to ask one quick question about Peter Pan and Wendy. Is there anything you can tell us about it at all? Period, because there's not a lot of information I feel like out there right now.
It's awesome. I can tell you that. We literally just wrapped on Friday, so this is my week of like not looking at the movie. Next week I'll sit down and watch the first cut of it because we've been editing as we go. I've seen everything, but I just haven't watched it all strung together. And it's we're not reinventing the wheel. I wanted to do the same thing that I did with The Green Knight, which was take a classic text and just illuminate it in a new way. So everything that audiences want out of a Peter Pan movie, if they want something out of a Peter Pan movie at all, if they don't, they should not go see it. But if they do want something out of a Peter Pan movie, I think they're going to find something wonderful and really invigorating and really beautiful. And I think important. I think this is like an important movie on a lot of different levels. But it is also the classic story. It's the story of the boy who didn't want to grow up and the girl he brought to Neverland. And you're going to get all of those classic beats. But in the same way that you've been talking about how The Green Knight just has a different feel than most medieval films, I think this is going to have a different feel than any Peter Pan movie that's ever been made before. And there's going to be more Peter Pan movies in the future, but I think this one is really special.
Was there anything in particular, like style or type of movie or story, that you were like that's kind of the avenue I want to take this one?
Yeah, when I went into this, the studio brought it to me to see if I was interested. And when I came back to them, I was like, I am interested, but I want to make it like The Revenant, but with flying children. And it's not exactly like that, but that is the sort of like the ethos by which we went into this whole adventure.
The Revenant with flying children. I don't know if we got to say more than that. That's about as wild of a combo, but I love it. See, now I'm hooked. Now I'm pitched. Thank you so much. We absolutely love The Green Knight. Out in theaters, if you can go see it on the biggest damn screen that you can possibly see it on. This is a blast. I hope to get to talk to you again.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.